Hey guys, this is part 2 of the story of Gabriel Belmont from the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series. For the full recap, go ahead and click here to watch this first video. Don't worry, we'll be here when you get back. For the TLDR, or W version, as the case may be, Gabriel Belmont was a member of the Brotherhood of Light whose wife died, spurring him on to an ultimately futile quest to bring her back from the dead, during which he slew the 3 Lords of Shadow, gave the devil himself a holy powered chokeout, and ended up becoming a vampire in order to clean up a mess left behind by the very founders of his order. Now, he goes by Dracula, and is ever so pissed at the seemingly predetermined hand fate has dealt him. That's all the explanations we have time for. For more info, go check out that other video. For the rest of you, let's dive back in.
So the next leg of our journey begins when Trevor Belmont is given a bit of information, namely that his mother had been killed by his father, and that his father was now Dracula, and since his father was now Dracula, it was up to Trevor to kill him, because only the blood of a Belmont could kill Dracula, apparently. Heading out for Dracula's castle, Trevor fought with and lost to his powerful vampire father, only with his dying breath whispering, "I am your son." Which of course, Gabriel/Dracula didn't believe until he looked into the mirror of fate, and it showed him that it was true. At this point, Dracula, who had had no clue at all that he even had a son, tried to resurrect him the only way he had available, pouring some of his extremely powerful and tainted blood into his dead son's mouth. It of course did nothing because he was already dead. So Gabriel put the body of his son, who had never given him his name, into a stone casket and carved the name Alucard into it. As he had been the opposite of him in life, a good thing, so his name would in death reflect that opposition, and left him in an open courtyard under the full moon of that cursed night.
Dracula became even more incensed and enraged, and after being forced to unknowingly kill his son, the only living connection he possibly could have had to his now dead wife Marie, and, his son. As such, he sent more armies on the Brotherhood and humanity. Unbeknownst to him, this caused even more death for his family, as Trevor had had his own wife and son, and the minions set loose by Dracula orphaned Dracula's unknown grandson, Simon. Eventually, Simon was found and raised by the men of the White Mountains, fitting given their surname. Years later, seeking vengeance for his parents' death, Simon too headed into Dracula's castle to face the Vampire Lord. By this time, more than a decade later, Trevor had awoken inside of the tomb in which he'd been interred. Realizing he was now a vampire, he accepted the name Alucard and aided his son Simon in defeating Dracula. Their battle culminating with Alucard holding Dracula in place while Simon staked him with Trevor's old combat cross. Afterward, the castle began to crumble around them and the two heroes, father and son, separated, Alucard never telling his son who he was. Though before the castle fell apart completely, Alucard recovered the stake portion of Gabriel's vampire killer that had been left in Carmilla's chest, taking it with him as he knew that, despite Dracula's seeming disappearance, he would be back.
Centuries later, Dracula did in fact return, and his castle once more became a focal point of death, sacrifice, and holy crusades. Dracula, by this time, even more morose, destroyed everything that came his way, including the host of Brotherhood troops, complete with Holy Paladin and gigantic mechanical medieval automaton that beset his castle on his last night during this time frame. The fight ended after Dracula, while watching the Paladin begin to enact some sort of last resort holy nuke spell, proclaimed that he himself was still a chosen of God, and thus was immune to such magics, even going so far as to join the Paladin in his spell, seemingly enhancing its power, such that the mystical energy released warranted a satellite's eye view to fully see it. When did this series turn into DBZ? When the dust settled, only Dracula stood, seemingly unaffected, just as he had claimed. Well, okay, there are at least a couple of things wrong with that, but anyway. As the dust settled, who should appear but Alucard, with a plan to solve all of their collective problems. You see, at this point, all Dracula really wanted was to die. Arguably the one thing beyond his grasp, as according to Alucard, the only person capable of permanently ending Dracula's life was Gabriel, his father. And, Dracula. And even he could only do so with his old vampire killer, which he destroyed. But even if he could somehow reconstruct the weapon and end his life, the world would still be covered in darkness, as Zobek, Death, Lord of Necromancers, was still at large, cowed only by Dracula's superior power, and the same was true for the devil, i.e., if Dracula disappeared, Satan would come, take over Zobek, and rule over humanity. So why should Dracula go through the bother of killing himself?
Enter Alucard's 5-step plan for the total salvation of humanity. Step 1. Dracula lets Alucard stab him through the heart with a blade that Alucard had made out of that vampire killer stake he'd absconded with years before. This would not kill Dracula, but would essentially put him in a vampire coma until it was removed. Additionally, the long sleep they assumed would be required for this plan would fudge with Dracula's memory, hopefully such that anyone who could peer into his mind, like Zobek, wouldn't be able to discover this plan. Step 2. With Dracula's disappearance on the night of the massive Brotherhood attack on his castle, they let centuries pass while both Zobek and the Devil begin to truly believe that Dracula was dead, so they can come out of the shadows and hatch their own schemes. Step 3. Knowing that Zobek was intelligent enough to know he could not defeat Satan alone, as he'd essentially already been manipulated and defeated by him once before. When the time was right and the threat of the Devil loomed, Alucard would remove the blade, allowing Dracula to wake up, weakened and memory scrambled, then lead Zobek to him. Since Zobek would go looking anyway, in the hopes that Dracula had been alive the whole time, and enlist his aid in preventing Satan's return to Earth, as Satan and Zobek had no love for each other. Step 4. Dracula would accept Zobek's plea for help because Alucard knew that Zobek had already found and reconstructed Gabriel/Dracula's old vampire killer, and thus possessed the only known means of permanently ending Dracula's life, and everyone, including Zobek, knew death was all Dracula really wanted. Step 5. When everything was ready and Dracula's power was restored, as the long sleep would fragment more than just his mind, Alucard would reveal himself and the two would ensure that the Devil was summoned to Earth in order to kill him permanently, do the same to Zobek, and then end each other's lives, thus removing all of the most powerful eternal evils from the board and giving humanity a clean slate to work with going forward.
500 years later, we discover that Alucard is a fricking chess master, as everything went pretty much exactly according to plan. With acolytes of Satan preparing to return their father, the Devil, to Earth, Zobek hunts down and finally finds a recently awoken Dracula and asks him to help. After a quick skirmish, which ends with an emaciated Dracula standing in front of a cathedral in what looks like a very modern New York-style city, Zobek leaves him simply with the invitation and a reminder that in exchange for Dracula's help, Zobek could end it all for him. After another nap, Dracula was still recovering after all, he left his hiding place in the cathedral and encountered a young boy, whom we learn later is a young Trevor Belmont, Gabriel's son, running down an alleyway. Pursuing Trevor, Dracula found himself getting royally thrashed by a demon who had no right to royally thrash the Prince of Darkness, but he was saved by a knight in black armor, falling unconscious soon after.
Quick side note on Alucard's location during all of this. After pulling the sword from Dracula's chest, Alucard had to make himself scarce. He couldn't ruin things by reminding Dracula of the whole plan, even inadvertently, as that would ruin the entire point of having his memory scrambled in the first place. But he discovered that Dracula's powers and weaponry hadn't just been scrambled, but removed and were now possessed by others unfriendly to their plans. So Alucard made sure to clear the paths. And after making ready the places to recover Dracula's power, Alucard left to go and hide for a time when he was stopped by the same Dark Knight who would later rescue Dracula, and who we find out is essentially Zobek's right-hand lieutenant. Seeing this perfect opportunity, Alucard silenced a potential informant for Zobek and took up his lieutenant's mantle, wearing the full-body covering armor, and taking his place as Zobek's right-hand man, putting him exactly where he needed to be to best complete their plans.
Later, Dracula awoke, and after feeding and regaining his strength, he passed out again. For the last time in this game, don't worry, the game doesn't all take place while Dracula is sleeping. As Dracula awoke, Zobek came out and did exactly as Alucard thought he would, laying out a plan to defeat all of Satan's acolytes before he could be brought to Earth. Zobek then encouraged Dracula to get to work and provided him with the information to start tracking down Satan's acolytes. In pursuit of the first acolyte, Dracula once again encountered a young Trevor who convinced Dracula to follow him, and as he did so, the world around them began to warp and shift, going from a technologically enhanced metal corridor, remember we're in roughly modern day to near future territory at this point, to a torch-lit cobblestone castle hallway. And Dracula realized that they were somehow in his old castle, which was the foundation that this modern city was built upon. It could be a dream or an alternate reality, but the best we could find is that it was some kind of mixture of the two. It's sort of a pocket dimension that he really goes to, because while there, Zobek loses all contact with and can't keep track of Dracula, and later, Dracula actually draws someone else into the space. So despite the fact that it seems to be some sort of mental construct, it's also a real, physical location that's made up of Dracula's memories and even has a blood creature, which later states that it is his hatred and rage incarnate. which turns all of what would have been Dracula's servants into angry, souped-up, blood-powered versions of themselves, hell-bent on killing their Dark Prince at one point or another, and which feels that Dracula belongs to the blood itself, or at least the dream realm, and should stay in the pocket dimension with them.
Back to the matter at hand, Dracula followed Trevor for a bit, along the way recovering his Void Sword, wielding it in all its cold glory to wound enemies with ice and pointiness. Afterward, young Trevor handed his father a talisman with a wolf on it, stating that when Dracula used it, Trevor would come. So, after Trevor disappeared, Dracula went on and used it, and a stark white wolf appeared to lead Dracula back to the real world. Once Dracula followed the wolf out, he found himself back not only in the real world, but closer to his goal, an acolyte. He arrived in time to watch his quarry break a bunch of canisters, releasing a gas into the city that had rather negative effects on humanity, turning them into horrific monsters. Dracula subdued but did not kill the acolyte, instead bringing her back to Zobek in the hopes that he could pry into her mind and give them some much-needed information. While Zobek was busy probing her brain, Dracula phased back into his pocket dimension to retrieve his chaos powers and acquire his old dragon talisman, which allows him to fully unleash his power, showing us exactly why he is called the Dragon. Look at him. So pretty. So deadly. Upon Dracula's return to our world, Zobek informed him that the acolyte's mind was too fractured to read, presumably a side effect of the gas, as she'd been dosed with it as well. So, Dracula set off to acquire the antidote. While en route, Dracula once again journeyed into his mind palace, this time encountering a humanized version of Carmilla, the first vampire, and his wife Marie. While there, he was poisoned by Carmilla, saved again by Marie, and eventually saved Marie from Carmilla by slaying Carmilla for the second time. Upon his return to our reality, Dracula then recovered the antidote and returned to Zobek.
Antidote in hand, they cured the acolyte, which is when they discovered she was at least partially demonic, and now, with her head cleared, unleashed her full power to do battle. Zobek, trying throughout the game to make sure they weren't discovered for fear of the devil and his acolyte's reprisal, erected a barrier so they'd go undetected, while Dracula and the demon acolyte chick murdered each other. Once victorious, Dracula fell once more into his pocket dimension, where Trevor requested that he find and return all of the missing shards of the Mirror of Fate, claiming that he couldn't finish his game without the mirror. So, Dracula, as a good father would, goes on a set of side quests in his own brain case and does battle with Agrius, the angry brother of Pan, and the Toymaker, a kind-hearted soul who is mutated by the aforementioned blood creature and subsequently forced to battle Dracula. Having retrieved 2 of the 3 mirror pieces that should have been way more than 3 mirror pieces, Dracula was informed that the 3rd and final piece was back in our world, and so he left the pocket dimension.
Upon his return, Dracula is informed that someone was looking for him at the cathedral in which Dracula had awoken. Upon arrival, he discovered it was a Brotherhood knight. The two then engage in a cat-and-mouse chase that ended in a different cathedral, thoroughly prepared for a vampire fight, and after a surprisingly difficult battle, actual holy magic against evil vampires works. Who knew? End up in a series of caverns below the cathedral where the knight in question was sheltering survivors from the craziness in the city. It is also revealed that the knight's name is Victor Belmont, the last of the Belmont line, making him Dracula's great-great etc. grandson, and that he was the current head of the Brotherhood of Light. Dracula gave the remaining antidote to Victor and was prepared to leave until Victor demanded he go along to help him in his quest to stop the acolytes. He acquiesced, and a short time later, Dracula and Victor were met by Alucard in the guise of the Black Knight, sent along when Zobek could no longer track Dracula's location, fearing he had somehow perished. The three were then accosted by waves of demons and mutated humans. Standing together for the first and last time, 3 generations of Belmonts fought evil side by side: Victor, Trevor, and Gabriel. When they stood victorious, Victor issued a magical challenge in the name of the Brotherhood to the acolytes, ordering Dracula and Alucard to hide while he did so. The youngest and last living Belmont sacrificed his life in that challenge, but provided Dracula and Alucard with a way to track the acolytes in the process, giving them a lead where previously they had had none. Turned out Victor also had the last piece of the Mirror of Fate, so Dracula took it and was immediately thrown back into his little pocket dimension.
Once inside, Dracula allowed Trevor to reassemble the mirror, but before anything else could happen, the blood appeared once again, this time swallowing Trevor and taking on a Dracula-like form. Ish. This is when we learn the whole "I am the anger" and blah blah blah, you belong with us bit about the nature of the blood. Dracula defeats himself, retrieving Trevor and reuniting the young boy with Marie. He is then encouraged to ensure that his lead on the acolyte isn't wasted. So he returns to the real world and tracks down the acolyte, who, like all people capable of bringing Gabriel or Dracula to his knees, goes all Palpatine up on his business. In response, Dracula somehow drew the acolyte into his pocket dimension, where Dracula was possibly stronger, but where the acolyte was most assuredly weaker, and then took him apart. Acolyte threat disposed, Dracula and Trevor have another conversation, this time with Trevor encouraging Dracula to look into the mirror. When Dracula refuses, indicating he's already seen his fate, Trevor switches tactics and simply asks him to choose his family when the time comes. The pocket dimension fades out, with Dracula telling him he's already chosen in that regard.
Returning to the real world, Dracula, Zobek, and Alucard, in the guise of the Black Knight, deduce the location of the final acolyte, and Dracula and Alucard are sent out to track him down and put a stop to his summoning ritual. Upon arrival, safely away from prying eyes, Alucard places his hand on Dracula's shoulder, giving him a jolt that returns his scattered memories to him. Finally remembering the whole plan, father and son greet each other and wait on the summoning ritual, planning to destroy Satan once he appears. However, the remaining acolyte teleports elsewhere to complete the ritual, and incensed at their letting the ritual continue, Zobek appears bearing the vampire killer to slay both Dracula and Alucard, revealing a significantly more impressive true form than we were shown centuries prior. He is then defeated permanently, and Dracula and Alucard head out to find the final acolyte's new location.
They arrive just in time to see the summoning ritual's final moments, Satan's return to our world, and his subsequent disposal of the acolyte, seeing as he had allowed Dracula, arguably his greatest enemy, to be present for the summoning. The devil has obviously been juicing and pumping the iron in the centuries since they last met, and seems to have decided armor is better protection than smoke, though only for his legs. Sure. Also, his eyes are purple. You know what? We're getting off track. The devil opens up their meeting by offering to share half the planet with Dracula, allowing the two of them to rule things together. But when Dracula refuses via silent glare, Satan proclaims that if he cannot have the world, no one shall, because he's a temper-tantruming 3-year-old. And summons a great Leviathan, flying off to nuke the planet with his giant-sized demon worm thing. Dracula and Alucard climb aboard as the creature flees, and then, thousands of feet in the air, manage to slay the creature before it can release its world-killing Kamehameha. And then, in arguably the most anime moment of the whole series, Satan possesses Alucard and fights Dracula on falling pieces of the giant monster, ending with Dracula slamming the devil, in Alucard's body, into the earth and preparing to end both his son and the devil with the vampire killer. Seeing Dracula's conviction, Satan flees Alucard's body in an attempt to preserve his life. But Dracula, vampire reflexes and all, plus whatever else he has, switches targets and impales the devil, killing the fallen angel once and for all, before reviving his son with his blood. The two then stand, the sun rising, and Alucard asks what comes next. As an answer, Dracula shatters the mirror of fate and declares simply, "No one knows what fate has in store." Thus, the first 4 steps of Alucard's 5-step plan for the total salvation of humanity went off more or less as planned. But the two vampires lived, presumably to spend their immortal lives together as father and son, with Dracula having chosen his family as Mind Palace Trevor had requested.
And that's basically the story of Gabriel Belmont, Lord Dracula, and the greatest of the Lords of Shadow. We hope you enjoyed this 2-parter. If you did, please leave us a like, and if you have ideas for videos you'd like to see us do in the future, do like Mariana Ernest and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore or Let's Play, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been
True Masters and Morons, signing off.
Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like it, hit this subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, go to the link on the left.
And for a video chosen by the gods of YouTube from our channel, hit that link on top.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.